Hello, and welcome to this latest release of audio from WasteBuild. Now, this session was one of only 3 keynote presentations across the 2 days and was given by the inspirational architect, academic and environmental activist, Duncan Baker Brown from BBM Sustainable Design. Duncan has practiced, researched and taught around issues of sustainable development for over 25 years and is the author of the RIBA published book, The Reuse Atlas, A Designer's Guide Towards a Circular Economy. Perhaps best known for his thought-provoking house projects, including the house that Kevin built and the Brighton Waste House, which gets a mention in the presentation and is made from over 90% waste material. There are links to both these projects, as well as any other nuggets of interest on the website and in the notes in the YouTube listing as well. Now, his talk highlights the importance of the built environment in tackling the climate crisis and uses inspirational but importantly, replicable and scalable examples from his own practice and many others to highlight what is already being done now. Do remember to follow, like and subscribe to our social channels, LinkedIn, Twitter and YouTube, of course, to keep up with the latest information from WasteBuild, and keep an eye on the website, www.wastebuild.com. Now, let's crack on with Duncan's presentation, once again chaired by David Greenfield from Circular Economy Club. So David, over to you. Enjoy.
Thank you very much for coming along this morning. I'm delighted that we've got a really excellent speaker to kick us off this morning. And I'd like to say a friend, which is even better. Hold on to your seats. Let me introduce to you Duncan Baker Brown, who's going to take you through what is designers tackling the climate change. Duncan.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. It's amazing to be here for me. I do quite a lot of these talks, but I haven't done one in the Netherlands for a little while. And most of my points of reference are in the Netherlands, so bear with me. But I'm going to set the scene, and because the music did it just now, which is from Fatboy Slim, who's based in Brighton, where I come from. And everybody is talking about it, honest. And it's been quite a year, quite an unusual year. Our Parliament declared a climate emergency. Architects declared a climate emergency. The Royal Institute of British Architects did. Amsterdam, Brighton. Everybody's got these amazingly ambitious, perhaps naive, but ambitious is the good word, 2030 targets to be net carbon zero. Architects are getting arrested. Architects are protesting. This is my mate Tom on the right there. He's got arrested for being one of the Extinction Rebellion crew who closed down Waterloo Bridge, among others, occupied the bridge, reclaimed the streets. Interestingly, Tom is a member of the ARB, Architects Registration Board, and basically if you get arrested and charged, you can be struck off. But Tom pointed out that the new Code of Professional Conduct for the RIBA and ARB suggests that you've got to put sustainability as #1 agenda. So, we're in interesting times, and we've formed the Architects Climate Action Network in the UK as well, and we are taking it seriously. I am an architect. And today, school children and adults are marching again in Madrid and around the world. It's not going away, which is interesting. And some people already have a plan. Helsinki has its action plan for 2035, and Amsterdam has various plans around waste and carbon as well. But why should we care? I mean, obviously, we're a small conference on the side of a bigger conference called World Architecture Festival, whatever. And, okay, there's a number of people in the audience, but come on, why aren't they all here? Maybe they don't give a toss about this sort of thing. Mass extinction, it is happening. It's going on all around us. This is the destruction of the natural environment, which I'm passionate about not doing. And that's a bit of protected rainforest. I could have shown you burning Australia, burning Arctic, what do you want? But this is actually part of the construction industry supply chain. And I stole this from Vivienne Westwood, the fashion designer. But that is, if we don't do anything, and by the way, I won't preempt a couple of future slides I'm going to do. If we don't do anything, the green stuff is where we're going to be living. The red stuff is uninhabitable. So why us, the construction and design industry? Well, in the UK, we consume 600 million tons of stuff a year, and a third of that, 200 million tons, is just immediately thrown away within that year. And 60% of that is from the construction industry, 120 million tons. And basically half of all emissions, CO2 and other particulate emissions, come from the constructed world. The construction industry consumes all the cement, a quarter of the aluminium, half of the steel, 25% of all plastic made around the world. The construction industry, if we change the way we go about what we do, we will have a huge impact. That's the bottom line. So what next? Pause. I've got a very talented partner that doesn't come up and stand up and talk like I do, and he came up with this cartoon 25 years ago. And really, we haven't done much else, but it's all right, these guys are in charge. And that was just something said last week. We have witnessed over a decade of environmental procrastination. And this is sort of where we are at the moment. The only thing missing on this, and I'm going to doctor this cartoon if I ever do another talk, I'm just going to have that little mammal mouse thing running along the bottom, and that's basically our industry at the moment. This emerging, completely different way of doing things. But this is where we are at the moment. So we need to learn how to manage planet Earth's resources, and it's all about that. Designers, architects, and constructors, makers, we are resource managers. We get stuff, we turn it into something, and then if we don't design an end-of-life strategy, we are the cause. So the challenges are we're not very good at it. This is a photograph of the last 23 North American bison in 1913. After this photograph was taken, 10 more were shot. All the North American bison now are related to the 13 that got away with it somehow. And also, this is a photograph of a new planning approval for a UK coal mine, and obviously China's doing lots of coal mines at the moment. So we're not off our addiction, but the big fossil fuel companies are less inclined to be climate deniers, more inclined now to put money into just saying it's not as urgent as we think it is. But there's a lot of press all the time about the problem. Just this autumn, we've hit peak CO2 emission targets. And then we've got people like our only Green MP, Caroline Lucas, who's a Brighton MP. She came up with a really powerful political broadcast this week, which was just talking about the stuff we fabricate. Say it out loud, Brexit, for fuck's sake. It gets in the way of what we really need to be talking about. It fills that void, just in case we really were trying to do something, because you know what? We know what to do and we know how to do it. So we have to drastically reduce our reliance on raw materials, because the mining and harvesting of raw materials is destroying our planet. And you've had this again and again. At the moment, we are a take, make, and throw away linear economy. But there are opportunities outlined by Braungart and McDonough in their book, Cradle to Cradle. Do good, not less bad. And that's a bit of a dig at sustainability, the word of it, not the action. The problem is with sustainability is a lot of people said, I'll be 10% or 20% more sustainable than I have been. But I'm still doing bad, just less often. You've got to step back and really reassess how you do whatever you do and do it in a planet-sensitive way, where waste equals food for either the biosphere or technosphere. And there's people out here, people out on the, I just arrived here this morning, and there's people I've known of for years, I've never met, who are out there. So we've got the real pathfinders on board, and the startups, the new startups and innovators. But these guys, this is Rural Studio in Alabama. This is a building from 20 years ago. Rural Studio are a practice and a school of architecture. Their final year students get to design a building that the local community needs. So this is a chapel, and that glass facade is 85 Chevrolet car windscreens. So this is a circular economy, and you have two spheres. You have the biosphere, all things natural and compostable, and then you've got the technosphere, which is the real challenge. So some good news. Since 2010, the UK construction industry has nearly halved the amount of waste it sends to landfill or incineration. And RAP estimates that nearly 20% of the UK construction industry is already circular. And coal, despite the new power stations, is starting to drop in terms of consumption. And this was an interesting graph I found last week. That little dip at the end, it would go down to 2050. So we have hope. And where is it? And I think it's our cities, and this is the bit I have to read, because this is the bit I need to be clear on. So I believe it will be competing city-states and regions that give us all hope, not governments preoccupied with 22 other big issues before they can think of the environment or climate change question. We know that 50% of the world's population, and by the way, 84% of the UK's population, currently residing in cities, they are now the main driver for economic and system change and have the potential to power a successful circular economy. In 2017, the London Waste and Recycling Board published their circular economy route map for London, which outlined a vision of a capital thriving through the adoption of principles of a circular economy, an economy that keeps products, components, and materials at their highest end value at all times. The report identified that by 2036, a circular economy could provide London with net benefits of up to £7 billion per annum, with up to 12,000 new jobs in the areas of reuse, remanufacturing, and materials innovation. All the stuff going on out on the floor there. And obviously, the EU produced a circular economy route package in December 2015 that produced similar figures for the whole of the European Union. Last year, California overtook the UK as the world's 5th biggest economy. It has huge environmental problems. Governor Jerry Brown ordered civil servants to put in place legislation to make California carbon neutral by 2045. Amsterdam has pledged to be waste-free by 2035. And in August 2018, 19 cities, including Paris and Tokyo, vowed to make all buildings carbon neutral by 2030 and to retrofit all others by 2050. And anybody coming up with net carbon neutral targets, the second sentence tends to be including the word retrofit, reworking what we've already got. And that is the big challenge. Last year, 620 cities and 122 regions reported climate actions to the CDP, a watchdog. Quoting from The Economist from September 2018, more than 800 firms worth almost $17 trillion have joined the We Mean Business coalition to reduce their carbon footprint. And all that happened before this year's declarations of climate emergency. So, I've written a book. Got a couple of copies here if anybody wants one. And the reason I talk about that is because my book was my sort of therapy, counseling session, looking for good stuff. So I didn't feel like everything was awful. And obviously I came to the Netherlands quite a lot, as you do a lot of stuff. But Michael Braungart, who wrote Cradle to Cradle, he will say that recycling and reuse is only slowing down the inevitable. And he's right if you take that linear model, because you're just slowing down the stuff ending up going to our oceans. So what I wanted to do with this book is to show that perhaps recycling and reuse were actually footsteps towards proper circular closed-loop systems. And I wanted to do that with case studies of delivered projects that made money for their clients and the designers and were relevant, okay? Not just bright ideas. We need bright ideas, but we also need exemplar projects. So I'm going to just take you through the sort of projects that inspired me. So recycling acknowledges an alternative material source, i.e. waste, but we don't like to call it waste. And you will probably, everyone in the audience, be familiar with these training shoes, which were made out of these gill nets and ocean plastic. Now, the point with these, and this is football kit made out of the same, there's all sorts of stuff now made out of ocean plastic, which is good. Now, the real point of it is, if you buy something made out of that source material, will it affect the way you behave? Will you then throw away that item? Obviously, Interface have been doing it for a number of years with their Networks program. And Durat set up their company to find a waste supply chain and turn it into a desirable material. And it's interesting that the pavilion in Dulwich Last week, there's this lovely pavilion that's been made out of this material, which is waste plastic. The pavilion's now been deconstructed and is going to be remade into other things. I'm working on an Interreg-funded project which was looking at sourcing waste streams in different areas. So this was in Caen, Rouen, and Bath and Brighton, and I'm in Brighton. And we've got a lot of large construction projects in Brighton at the moment, and we were sourcing waste material from those. And then other unusual waste flows. So this is oyster shells from a restaurant near to this building that I did for the University of Brighton called the Waste House. And we found one restaurant that throws away 50,000 oyster shells a year. Now, oyster shells are actually calcium carbonate, which is the same material as limestone, which if you don't put it on the walls of your buildings or the floors, goes into the cement industry. So we started playing around with these waste flows, and we made tiles out of oyster shells. So that's recycling. Recycling has a carbon footprint, creates some other waste perhaps, but the white tiles there is 100% oyster shells. The pink ones have got some brick debris in them. So that's recycling. Reusing is a lot more intelligent, and there's a lot of it out there. And a lot of people are calling it urban mining. And these people do it in the UK, Elvis and Cressy. They now buy up the world's supply of damaged fire hoses and sell some of them to other people and make stuff out of them. They found a waste flow that was causing a problem, and they've turned it into an asset. This is the project I did, which was to do a lot of that and create a building. It's called the Brighton Waste House, but it's actually a teaching facility on campus at the University of Brighton. And 90% of everything that is that building, we found. And we started off by saying, let's make a building out of the 20% of material that arrives on a construction site and never gets built, gets thrown away. But we then changed that. So we had lots of school kids come to visit, and there was a lot of plastic. So we started collecting that plastic, and the Waste House is now this building which is a collection of dumb designs, i.e. stuff designed without an end-of-life strategy. DVDs, video cassettes, 25,000 toothbrushes collected in only 4 days from Gatwick Airport. We collected them from the planes that landed. These toothbrushes were fossil fuels processed into plastic, then processed into toothbrushes, then put in an aeroplane, flown somewhere for 3 hours at least, and then burnt. That's the life cycle of that design. This stuff, you'd think, was not around anymore. It is. Most plastic ever made is with us. So the Waste House had 4,000 DVDs, 4,000 VHS videos. Denim, from a company that imports denim from China to the UK, cuts the legs off, and sells shorts at festivals, music festivals. We've got 2 tons of denim legs, which is a very good insulator. Then vinyl banners, the sort of, well, not here actually, but the sort of banners you see for festivals and things. We wrapped the inside of the Waste House with that, created our vapor control layer out of these banners. Bicycle inner tubes we use for soundproofing and air tightening around openings. We bought solar panels. You can get lots of second-hand ones now, by the way, but at the time we bought solar panels, and the roof membrane was recycled Pirelli car tires. And then the most nutty thing of all, really, because it looks good, it performs, and it's a genuine waste material, and I'm standing on it, it's carpet tiles. We got them fire-tested on site, and we clad the whole building in carpet tiles. Now, this building's now 5 years old, and these carpet tiles still look great. It's got full planning and building regulations approval, and like I said, 90% of it is material other people threw away. We made a sculpture out of waste. We hold symposia all around the waste, and that sculpture ended up being the inside cladding of the studio upstairs of the Waste House. That's us trying to map what it is. Just realized I can use this. We found other waste streams, duvets, bedding. In the UK, nobody reuses second-hand duvets or pillows for the obvious reason someone might have died in them. It's that sort of thing. In the UK, no, they all go to incineration and landfill, but we were starting to think about using them as insulation. So there it is. And we did use it as insulation in the waste house. This is a new project. We've been monitoring it very sophisticatedly, as you can see, for its performance. And it's actually very good. I mean, it's polyester. It's a fire hazard, but a lot of insulation that goes into the construction industry is a fire hazard. But once it's secure in the wall, it's not a fire hazard. It got on the BBC this time last year. Now, this is slightly dull, but it's stuff really happening. These are buildings that are being deconstructed and reused, and this is an example I saw at a conference in Manchester this year. So this is a light industrial building that was not needed in Dublin, and because it had a BIM model that quantified what the building was, building information modeling, the building was deconstructed and brought over to the UK. And some things didn't work. This design check thing noted how things had to be played around with, bit of welding, bit of painting. But it saved the clients £1 million on what would have been a £5 million project. So that's a 20% saving for going through the problems associated with deconstruction and reconstruction. These people did it a few years ago, and interestingly, these are the people that didn't want to be in my book. Kamadi Groek do lots of really nice cultural buildings. But they did this while they were a smaller practice. They did the filling station in King's Cross in central London. And it was a petrol station turned into a pop-up restaurant that was around for 2 or 3 years. Now, what was really interesting is that pop-up restaurant came to the end of its life, and Kamadi Groek thought, oh, we'd given you these concrete panels. These are new. We could use those on another job. And there it is, on another job in Liverpool. So this is a permanent building. This is a cancer respite centre, a Maggie's centre. And it's made out of 20-year-old porter cabins, on the right of the image, and those concrete panels that I showed. Now, the reason I put that case study in my book is because I hadn't heard of a design practice that thought, or an architecture practice thought, that building's coming down, that one's going up, why don't we put them together? Seems obvious. You're probably all familiar with these guys. 20th century brickwork is very difficult to reuse unless you've got an angle grinder and a lot of energy, and you can repurpose it. Anyone from Rota in the room? No, okay. Rota have been doing this for as long as Superuse and others, almost as long as Superuse, not quite as long. But they're interesting. They're academics, artists, architects, designers, and building deconstructors. And these slides are to be read from top left to bottom right. That's what they do to buildings. They carefully deconstruct buildings that would normally be demolished. They convince people to slow down the process, and they get a resource out of it. And some of the work is difficult. But construction work is difficult as well. And they're deconstructing these buildings at the moment. It's the World Trade Center in Brussels. These are buildings that were never really liked. They're a financial proposition. They've come to the end of their life. They need to be demolished. But instead of that, they're being deconstructed. And there's the buildings deconstructed in the yard of Rota, and they're selling it. And we're also doing a research project with them. So what we're doing, a little plug, in Brighton next August, we're doing the School of Reconstruction. So with David, who introduced me, and Brighton Hove City Council, we're actually finding a construction site. We found it already. We're going to slow down demolition into deconstruction. We're going to deconstruct the building, and then we've got teams of students who are going to then repurpose that material. So we're going to play around with it and look at different meanings, etc. So step 3 on our route to closed-loop systems and a circular economy is reduce. You turn up at a situation as a manufacturer, designer, whatever, and instead of bringing loads of new stuff on site, you think, no, we won't do it that way. We'll work with what we've got. And this is where you consider cities as material stores for the future. And this is a project I've talked about a lot, but it is the project for me that does it. So this is L'Aquitaine in Paris, and the tower there on the left-hand side was due for demolition and rebuild. The mayor of Paris had got the budget for it, 45 million euros, I think it was. And L'Aquitaine went to the mayor and said, we'll give you your new tower for 2/3 the cost. 10 years later, the mayor said yes, or whoever was the incumbent mayor said yes, and they had a go. And this is what they did. So instead of demolishing, they just focused on the external concrete panels of the tower. They removed them, and on the same day, reinstalled these winter gardens, which gave the occupants of the flats about 12 square meters of new accommodation, lots of extra daylight, so they weren't putting their lights on during the day, lots of extra ventilation, and of course, they've wrapped the building in new accommodation, which creates insulation, and it's unheated. So the people in the apartments were older people, it was sheltered housing. They didn't have to be moved out, so you're not disrupting the community or displacing it, breaking it up. It's a win-win-win. And those are the modules on the left going up, and it ended up looking like luxury flats. And that's before and after. So can you imagine in the morning having the before and in the afternoon having the after? Because that's what it was like. There is a book published by the architects that includes quotes from the tenants who are moaning because of the disruption and the ongoing stuff. But it lasted 5 months on site. And the tenants got amazing apartments with reduced bills. Now, this is interesting just because the ambition. An existing tower block in Norway, it's not been demolished, it's been stripped out, but that material is being recycled, and 80% of it's going to become the source material for the new extended building. This is something we're working on with Brighton Hove City Council. So the grey 3 towers, the little 3 short ones, they're the existing towers, and the red stuff is new accommodation we're putting on top. And then the blue stuff is the new facade, a bit like L'Aquitaine and Vassal, and the yellow stuff is new apartments, courtyard houses at the bottom. Now, the interesting thing for us there is that we're reusing what's there. Brighton's got South Downs National Park to the north and the sea to the south, so it's locked. It's got about 15,000 homeless families at the moment. And so we were charged with doubling the housing density on site, providing lots more improved communal facilities, but also, crucially, halving the carbon footprint. So you get the red stuff really working hard for the grey stuff. And there's some other good news in Brighton, which I think this is rubbed off. This was a tower block. This is not the tower block. They were demolishing a tower block, a bit like the L'Aquitaine and Vassal one, and rebuilding with this. So that's gone from demolition, and now there's the tower block on the right-hand side of the image. They've changed their mind. They're extending it, refurbishing it. So this stuff is catching on. But what we really need is a network. A network, so it's not this informal, I'll work hard at it like Rota do and others. It's common practice. So I'm sort of really plugging for a regional and national resource exchange. And Superuse came up with this harvest map idea, and this is something my practice do now. We call it resource mapping, and this is literally looking for materials near your site. And this could be stuff lying around, or it could be woodlands, whatever, managed woodlands. We've got a lot of managed woodlands in Sussex, north of Brighton. But we've also got a brickworks with a pile of overfired and underfired bricks that end up going back in the hole where the clay came out of. Those bricks we can use, and we are using them. So this is a house we designed made out of materials that came within 15 kilometers of the house itself. Waste materials, organic materials, but the biosphere and the technosphere in effect. And we're doing it with, this is, I don't know if anybody in your audience is an opera fan, but this is Glyndebourne Opera House, which is a rural opera house, and it has waste flows. And that's the size of the opera house, and we're doing a pavilion for them next year in that blue rectangle, made from waste flows. That's the view, nice, isn't it? So we're doing making a pavilion out of waste flows from the opera house. So we've got oyster shells again, we've got cork, we've got locally sourced sweet chestnut, we've got bricks, and that's the pavilion. And what the idea is you're going to have the opera goers, so a lot of them are going to use this pavilion as sort of super rich, flown in for the days for the opera, and we're trying to raise awareness of resource management there. And what I came up with when I wrote the book was this idea that what we're all trying to do in this room is mine the Anthropocene. It's rework the stuff that's already been produced. So what would happen if you closed down the mines producing raw materials and just reworked the stuff that's been made in the last 300 years? that's in landfills, sea pollution, but also the city's redundant buildings. So you mine the Anthropocene and you nurture, in a very well-informed way, the natural world. This was interesting. A year ago on the BBC, Zoe Laffling from the UCL Institute of Making, she dug up a landfill site which was 40 years old. Even the newspapers had not decomposed. So it's resources. And now we've got MyROG, Major Projects Resource something group, just plugged a white paper for a national resource exchange in the UK. It's going to happen. So our final step on our sort of journey towards proper closed-loop systems, where we've got a biosphere and a technosphere, we've got to create new buildings that are material banks for future buildings. And Peter Zumthor sort of did it in the year 2000 with this Swiss soundbox at the Hamburg Expo. At the end, and this building was big, that's just a little entrance. It was a big, sort of half-a-hectare building. At the end of its use, they undid the springs that are compressing those timber planks together, and they gave away the timber to hundreds of construction projects. That's how all future buildings have got to be. This is a building we did on the South Coast about 12 years ago. And it's a bit of a fuzzy picture, but it was a really interesting thing because we made sure that that was second-hand steel frame. It's an 8-story office building. We sourced the steel second-hand, not recycled, second-hand. And it was bolted together, not welded together. So some of this stuff is really basic, but the 65-year-old steel fabricator on site said he hadn't done one of those since 1966, where you bolted together instead of welded. And that's the building. It also had 7 stories of sheep's wool insulation, timber fiber board insulation, locally sourced timber for the timber frame, and it came in on budget and on time. Nobody gave a toss about it at the time. And this is the interesting stuff. Buildings that are grown. Future materials, they're not future materials. We've had them for a long time, for the most part. But what was interesting with this university building at the University of East Anglia in Norfolk was that when the architects got the commission, the first thing they did was speak to the local farmers to order hectares of wheat, barley, and reeds. And most of the material finishes you're looking at there are organic. The floor, the walls, the balustrade, ceilings, the external materials have all been grown. They've all locked carbon. We've got to get away from burning. This is the hi-fi building by The Living, made out of mycelium bricks. Biome are exhibiting their mycelium material on the floor. This is from about 5 years ago. Corn stalks, mushrooms, and silica. This is them being grown, 3 days. Compressive strength tests. Biomason do a denser, more brick-like version as well. Again, using mycelium. And it's everywhere. This is this week. So this is a training shoe made out of eucalyptus tree fibers, algae foam, castor beans, and natural rubber. And it's going out next year. And we also obviously need new procurement models. And when I was writing my book, lots of people were saying you've got to include Venlo City Hall. And I was like, why? I don't see anything interesting about it. Not for my book, anyway. They sent me this, and it's like solar-powered, yippee, collecting water. You know, I'm just thinking, well, that's old-school sustainability. What's the big deal? And then I saw this on Twitter. The frame is in situ cast concrete, which is the very frame that we want to avoid, because that is a monolith. That will only ever be rubble if it's demolished one day. But then I spoke to the design team, and okay, they didn't win on the frame, but at the beginning of their project, they spent 3 weeks, in effect, locked in their offices interviewing possible supply chain contributors. They spent a lot of energy and time interviewing people supplying every little bit of that building and convincing 30 suppliers to change their model from a linear one to a circular one So now they've got over 35 cradle-to-cradle certified products, including the furniture, which is quite, when you're talking about procurement, at the end of this, the furniture's first life, in 10 years' time, the manufacturers take back the furniture which is leased, and they give Venlo City Hall 300,000 euros for the privilege of having that resource material back. I don't need to talk too much about this building, but it is the real deal. So you've got a building here that's inspired by what's going on at De Kervel and other places, and they actually do it on a larger scale. So the building's bolted together, sustainable materials, waste materials like denim used for insulation. And the most powerful thing for me when I went there with my practice and my students was to have Petran, who's in the audience, stand there and say, we are a financial bank, but we are also a materials bank. And you did say that. And that for me was, this is where it's been taken seriously. If a building at the end of its first life is a material asset for an owner, it makes more financial sense to do it that way than to have a deficit where you've got to demolish and throw away. My last couple of slides. I was at a conference over the summer, Major Projects Association, and Bernard here from the World Bank. He said most times when you're thinking about the triple bottom line of environment, social and economic issues with sustainability, you end up with Mickey Mouse. I just thought that was really good. So we've got to stop treating sustainability as a Mickey Mouse issue. And our biggest challenge is not changing what we do today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Duncan. You've got time for questions.
Oh.
You were early. Duncan said to me 45 minutes. I was just about to put the 5-minute warning up, so you're ahead. So we've got the pleasure of asking Duncan some questions. If any of you would like to ask Duncan any questions, thoughts, comments, if you could put your hands up and I'll bring the mic round. Or are you all too stunned by what he's presented?
Oh,
Petran at the front.
I've misquoted Petran.
If you could give your name.
Petran. Duncan, thanks. Great presentation again. And this whole field of circular examples you see, and you have already for many years back, like one of these building 12 years on the go, and showing circular again. However, I was just telling Hans, the architect of Circle, it's great we still have this building as an example, but what we lack more examples. So from your experience, traveling around the world, starting circular economy so many years ago, do we see it speeding up? Is there a hope for more and more projects and innovation and larger and etc.?
I think we're in a really interesting time because, for example, if I take you back to the UK, 75% of the population of the UK now live within local authority regions that have declared a climate emergency. But they haven't just done that. They've then said they want to be net carbon zero by 2030. And then they start looking at their in the case of Brighton, it's their tourist industry, because that's a huge industry, but the construction industry. And the construction industry is always one of the first industries that's looked at. And there are a number of cities around, well, the UK and Europe who are rolling out circular economy route maps. And it's all about, at the end of the day, resource management. So designing buildings that are resourceful at the end of their first lives is an easy sort of an easy thing to go for. And so I think we're at the point where we're just about to get the legislation that's going to encourage and facilitate a circular economy. Meanwhile, we are in an environment at the moment where it's all about exemplar projects and case studies and raising awareness to people. That's why I'm out talking a lot, trying to do this with David and others, is raising awareness of the fact it can be done. It's not just a circular economy route map that your city may have. But I think it's really interesting times. It's a totally different environment for me, political and otherwise. April this year onwards, it's been a different world. I've been invited to places I would not normally get anywhere near. Major Projects Association invited me to do a keynote in July or August. I wouldn't normally get anywhere near an event like that. It was all about the circular economy, and you got all these heavyweights from IBM and places like that. They're all talking about it in an informed way. So I think the knowledge is there now, and I think really, for example, WasteBuild next year and the year after is going to be a different event to it is now, because it won't just be us, it's going to be a lot of people interested.
I think it's a really interesting question, Petron, actually, because I think one of the things that Duncan and I have been working together with the City of Brighton Hove over the last 6 months, and one of the things that we've been finding is individuals that get it and then work out how they can incorporate and take this learning and put it into their day job. And one really simple example, which I like to use now, one of the housing officers came along to a conference like this in Brighton in July, went back to his desk the next day and changed the specification for the housing that they were procuring so that it could be circular. And for me, I think that's one of the key reasons why we have this sort of event, is to inspire people, but also to inspire people to take their day job and do something with the knowledge they get from today.
And crucially, we had the head of procurement for the city tell his team after we'd done a workshop with them, this is our number one issue. This wasn't just an interesting workshop you guys are doing, this is what we're going for next year. Because, the politicians have declared a climate and ecological emergency. And basically, the construction industry is responsible for 50% of the problem, you can argue. There's a question over there.
You can walk, Petron. Thank you. This is audience participation at its best.
Hi, I'm David Katz with Just In Case. I always, wherever you go, you see these beautiful numbers of 2030 and 2050, which are very easy numbers because most of the decision makers won't be the decision makers by 2030 anymore because they will be retired. So how are we going to make sure that we set milestones now every year? Because the buildings that we're conceiving in 2020 will be the buildings that actually have to deliver those results in 2030.
From my point of view, we need legislation from the top down, because at the moment, again, the UK is the industry I know very well. There's a huge gulf between the performance criteria set in building regulations and what we actually need to do. Hence, local authorities are at the moment running around trying to find people that know what to do. That is exactly what's happening at the moment. NHS trusts, universities, whoever, people who procure big projects, major projects, are trying to find out what to do because the legislation isn't there at the moment. It's going to have to kick in pretty quickly, and that's one of the scary things in the UK. We've made our own sort of existential problem with Brexit, and we're not actually putting our energies into the climate emergency. That's why I say it will be city-states doing that. We're going to have to sort of just rely on cities for a bit until the national legislation kicks in. But it needs to do it quickly.
Yeah, but just because if we realistically say that we want to achieve these 2030 goals, this means that no single building can be built anymore that doesn't adhere to those goals, right?
I agree with you completely. I mean, as soon as I couldn't believe they were actually saying 2030. When I heard the first declaration at 2030, I just thought, well, the people declaring obviously don't know what they need to do. I think 2050 is an ambitious target.
And I think on that note, it is an ambitious target, and I like to think that everybody here is a pioneer, and we're going to help to make that change. Duncan, thank you ever so much for your brilliant presentation. Very informative as ever. Brilliant. If you can thank Duncan in the normal way, that'd be brilliant.